We're going to talk more about that defense in a minute, but we actually have something pretty cool right now. We have a special report from our very own Aaron Keller about some of the testimony in the Koehn case. So take a look at this.
The prosecution called witness after witness to testify about arriving at the Koehn home and finding little Sterling dead.
His eyes were open and he was a blank stare.
Nurse Tony Friedrich was there early.
His arm was cold and stiff, and he had what appeared to be blood around on the side of his mouth. My assessment is this is not a baby who I can do CPR on.
You raise your right hand.
Chief Deputy Reed Paulo struggled to make sense of it.
You can see every rib. It's really small.
His assessment continued.
There was feces and urine that had been straining through the diaper for a long time.
Deputy Jason Rosel said air fresheners had been deployed to cover up this.
The first thing that I could smell was human urine. When I got closer to baby, I could smell I guess the only way to describe it is death.
Medical investigator Jeremy McGrath said the little boy was covered in blankets that became wet with decomposition.
Was there anything else unusual that you saw around the child?
I noticed flies and gnats.
Prosecutors estimate that Sterling Koehn was left for between 9 and 14 days before his parents finally called for help.
Malnutrition, dehydration, infection caused by diaper rash. That's what caused this child's death. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that this defendant, the father of that child, is responsible for that death.
Great report there by our very own Aaron Keller. One thing I want to mention before I misspoke, the defendant was not married to Cheyenne Harris. In fact, he's actually still married to his wife that he had a 7-year-old boy with, but he was in a relationship with Cheyenne, and again, she has been charged in connection with the death of Sterling. But now I want to talk a little bit more about this case, and I have a very special guest joining me, a very familiar face. You probably all recognize him, our very own host here on the Law and Crime Network, and also a law enforcement expert, Vincent Hill. Vincent, great to see you.
Hey, good morning, Jesse. Great to see you as well.
So the state rested yesterday. Do you think that they put on a very strong case, or did they didn't? I'm very curious about what you think that they put on, because again, they are charging him with murder, and again, in that state, they don't have to prove so much premeditation, but that the child died as a result of the child endangerment or assault. What do you think about how they're doing so far?
I mean, I think they're doing the best they can. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it's tragic. A 4-month-old is deceased. And, you know, you heard testimony that the diaper hadn't been changed in well over a week. There was that malnutrition. So I think they're doing the best they can. But to your point, I think the defense will come out and say, hey, this was the mother's responsibility based on how he was raised, based on his beliefs of what he believes a woman should do with the child. So I'll be curious to see what the defense comes up with in this case, Jesse, to say, hey, my client is not guilty here. We should put this on the mother and her postpartum depression.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, we're all really curious to see if that holds any weight, whether that defense will actually work. And we'll study it a little bit more when the courtroom comes back in live today. And we are keeping a very careful eye on the courtroom feed. So as soon as something happens, we'll go there. But right now, in case you missed it, we have to play some very, very important testimony, but I warn our viewers right now, this is extremely difficult. This is the medical examiner describing the injuries sustained by this 4-month-old baby. So I warn our viewers right now, this is very disturbing, this is very graphic, but take a look.
Yes. What is that?
Denial of critical care.
Do you have an opinion as to the manner of death?
Yes.
And what is that?
Homicide.
Do you hold those opinions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to play you a collection of some of these clips. We might spare you some of the details, but you're going to get really an understanding of what this baby died from. And you know what was interesting, Vincent, is that the medical examiner said it was a combination of dehydration, malnutrition, and the diaper rash. Either of those, any of those three separately could have caused the death, but combined together, there really was no way that he could survive. It just amplifies the speed of death.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, he was 4 months old, not like he was 4 years old where he could at least change his own underwear or open the refrigerator or something like that. So the baby was very helpless. And as a parent of a 23-year-old, actually, she turned 23 on Halloween, and a 17-year-old, I remember those days of having to get up in the middle of the night and change those diapers and feed the baby. Yeah, we all say, oh my gosh, I really don't want to get up at 2 in the morning. But that's what you have to do as a parent. That's your responsibility. Not only the mother, but the father as well. As long as you're the parent of that toddler, that is your responsibility. So I can see exactly why Zachary is charged in this case.
And you know what was interesting too is when they had an investigator on talking about, let's look at the condition of the house. There were other parts of the house that were well maintained. There was food in the fridge, in the cupboards, other areas seemed to be neat. But Sterling's room was 81 degrees and he died in his own feces. So when you're looking at that, if you were investigating this, that would be a red flag, right?
Yeah, that's a huge red flag, and it tells you the total lack of care that they had for that young toddler, that they clean up the rest of their house, but you get to his room, it's 81 degrees, he's in his own feces. It just tells you the lack of concern they had for that young baby.
Let's see when the medical examiner talked about the time of death, because we are trying to understand the circumstances of this, as difficult as it is to listen to. Let's see what happens when he was asked whether he can approximate the time of Sterling's death.
In this particular case, are you able to give an opinion as to the range of time that Sterling died?
I'm not able to give a definite time of death or even really a range.
Now, Vincent, he wasn't able to approximate the time of death, but can we all agree that this baby was put in a condition, it didn't happen over an hour's span. I think they said the diaper wasn't changed for days. And doesn't that become critical, how long he was kept in this state for?
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind, the average person, including a toddler, it takes sometimes over a week to die of starvation. So you take in the diaper rash, you take in the malnutrition, the dehydration. This baby suffered, Jesse. He suffered tremendously at the hands of his parents.
And I don't want to get too graphic here, but what I found interesting from an investigator perspective is, weren't they able to use the maggots as a way to show timing? You know, if there was feces and they turned from flies into larvae into maggots, I'm not sure if my ecosystem analysis is correct there, but you get what I'm saying. Doesn't that give a time frame for people? And you correct me if I'm wrong, when you're investigating these kinds of homicides, that can be a good indicator of how long the body's been there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great indication of how long the body has actually been sitting there. Typically, you know, this doesn't happen over a few hours. It takes several days sometimes for this to occur. So investigators can get a sense of how long the little baby was laying in the swing there.
Sometimes I just can't believe what we're talking about, and then we look at this and it's just shocking. Hey, listen, Vincent, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, you and I have a lot more to discuss, and we have 2 live trials today. Stay tuned. Okay, let's break this down a little bit back here with Vincent Hill. Vincent, one of the weird aspects is that Koehn was a father of 3, but yet Sterling was the one who died. How do you think that plays in the jury's mind?
Well, certainly they're going to question that, and maybe they will start looking at the mother here. I mean, he has, you know, I think his oldest child is 7 years old. So, you know, those kids appear to be healthy and living a decent life. So, of course, the jury's going to say, well, what happened here in the case of Sterling? Was it really Zachary that did this, or was it the mother who neglected this child? Maybe he was out working. Maybe there are other factors that we just don't know about at this time. But the jury's definitely going to look at that, Jesse.
The prosecution keeps saying that he deliberately caused the death. He was the main cause of death for Sterling. Failure to provide critical care. I guess that makes sense if another baby who was living in the house, a 2-year-old, and then you have Sterling and the 2-year-old's okay. Doesn't that show, I don't know if the right word is a bias, but that there was something against Sterling that you didn't have against the other baby? Then again, like you said, couldn't the jury look at it, well, if Sterling was really the mother's responsibility in the eyes of Koehn, then maybe that explains it. So that fact can go both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you prove that he did a failure to take care of this little toddler. See, that's the bigger question. What proof does the state have to say, yes, he failed in his duties as a father when there's two adults in that house tasked with taking care of that toddler?
Let's talk a little bit more about Willis Koehn. He provided some more testimony on the stand. This is where he talks about taking care of his first son and home life with Sterling. Take a look. Okay, that was interesting. Vincent, now the defense, you can see, wants to say, hey, Cheyenne Harris, not a good mother. You know, Koehn himself recognized there were some issues. But doesn't that go against them? Because if he recognized there was a problem with Cheyenne being a mother, and as his father just said, he realized if there was an issue, he would have to step up. He knew that. Isn't that go against the defense's argument?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because at the end of the day, Zachary was the father of little Sterling, right? So you can't just simply say, well, because the mother wasn't doing her responsibilities, then I'm not going to do my responsibilities. You don't get that option, Jesse, as a parent to just say, well, if the other person doesn't do it, I'm not doing it, and the baby has to fend for themselves. That's not an option here. So, yeah, I think that's actually working against them here, Jesse.
And what about the concept that we heard that this was not, Sterling was not his first baby? He had a baby named Caden with another woman. This other woman had issues. She couldn't take care of the baby. So I wonder how much the jury is saying, well, he's had an experience with somebody before where there's an issue. He should have been even more aware moving forward. And the reason we're all talking about this is because we think the defense is going to be saying, let's put the blame on Cheyenne. She had postpartum depression. It was her fault. So do you get what I'm saying here? That he literally, he's done this before. I mean, he understood it. He should have been even more aware.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to, I have two kids. They're 5 years apart. I was a much better parent the second go around. I didn't make the same mistakes. So you heard the dad there say, well, they gave the other child to the parents because he didn't think that the mother was mentally capable of taking care of that child. So the jury's saying, well, why didn't you do that for this young Sterling that was found in his swing with maggots? You had this opportunity before, so why'd you make the same mistake twice?
And in other words, even though he was adopted, I'm talking about Zachary, adopted into this religious family, and part of their religion is that it's a very conservative religion, you know, in the sense that women are supposed to be seen as the people that take care of the home and take care of the children. That notion can only go so far, right? I mean, you're still the father.
Yeah, you're still the father, and your religion doesn't negate the law. You know, a lot of people assume that it does, and a lot of people will use religion as a defense, but that's not a defense in a court of law, because we have laws. You have responsibilities as a parent to take care of your child until they're 18 years old, and he failed here, it looks like.
Okay, real quick, his behavior has come into question, too, the fact that he seemed kind of emotionless when Sterling died. What did you make of that testimony?
Well, I didn't quite see that testimony. What I did see yesterday, Jesse, is when every time they were showing pictures, the medical examiner was talking, you can see it there on your screen. I mean, he had his hand covering his eyes there. You know, I think the guilt is actually setting in, and he didn't even want to look at that.
And I know that at certain points during the course of the trial so far, he has cried. Tears have come down, but it's always interesting trying to get inside the mind of the defendant. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we just learned. Vincent, let's start from the beginning of this, where he says that Zachary didn't tell him about his son Sterling, but told him about his daughter. That seems weird.
Yeah, it seems very weird. And as a father of a young boy who has my name, I mean, one thing men usually want to do is brag about their son, right? Most men, when they find out their wife or their girlfriend's pregnant, they want a boy because that carries on your name. So I found that very strange, Jesse.
Yeah, that's, again, and I think it's important for the prosecution to establish that there was a different opinion for one child as opposed to another. There seemed to be a bias, right? Is that what the prosecution's doing here? Saying, hey, listen, let's show who Zachary Koehn is. There was something he didn't like about Sterling, right? He liked his other children, but he didn't like Sterling. Why did he keep Sterling's room 81 degrees, didn't feed him and didn't clothe him and didn't change his diaper while there was another baby in the house that was okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And why didn't he mention, little Sterling to this coworker that we know he did drugs with. I mean, even during one of those meth binges, you would assume that the fact that you have a son at home would come up, but in this case, it didn't.
How much do drugs play into this? I know that when they did an analysis of Sterling's umbilical cord, there was the presence of methamphetamine. So how did meth or whatever other kind of drugs, how did this get involved in this case?
Wow. You know, it's mind-boggling, Jesse. I mean, anytime someone's under the influence of either meth or cocaine, of course, their mind is in an altered state, right? So, you know, maybe the defense is going to come back and use that some type of way. But the fact that it was on the baby, it tells you the amount of meth that was actually going on in that house at all times.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible what was going on in that house. And talking about going on in that house, we have the testimony of Sheila Schroeder, who's from Child Protective Services from Iowa. She's a social worker. Let's play some of her testimony when she took the stand. Okay, so it should be noted that this witness said that the couple's 2-year-old daughter was removed from the house after Sterling's death, and it was the first time that she had had contact with the family. She also said that when she met with Koehn 2 days later after Sterling's death, he was laughing throughout the meeting. She provided some really interesting testimony. But Vincent, one of the things that's so startling is trying to find warning signs and seeing if there was any way to prevent this. And we have an interesting statistic that I want to throw up here for our viewers to see, because it's pretty startling. Again, this is a whole case about child abuse. So the child abuse epidemic is occurring every year. 3.6 million referrals are made to child protection agencies, and 6.6 million children are involved. I guess, Vincent, my question to you is, why is this happening?
You know, I hate to sound like this, Jesse, but some people just shouldn't be parents. I mean, a lot of people go out and they have babies, you know, because they're not ready or whatever the case may be, and they assume, well, I don't need to be a parent, you know. And that's the unfortunate part of this. A lot of people, they have children, they're not ready, they're not responsible. You heard the testimony from his coworker that he was on drugs. Listen, all of that is supposed to change the minute you find out you're pregnant. But in this case, it didn't. And that's why you see a lot of these cases. I've been in some homes, Jesse, where I've walked through feces, where babies were walking through feces and the parents were on cocaine or methamphetamine. People don't take responsibility for their kids. They would rather use their drugs or something else in front of their kids.
And speaking of methamphetamine, listen to what happened at her cross-examination of Sheila Schroeder, because this is horrifying. Take a look. Vincent, I'm shocked here. So what she basically said is that the hospital who did this test on the umbilical cord, they didn't report that test to the Iowa Department of Human Services. What?
Yeah, Jesse, I am befuddled by that. I mean, this reminds me of back in the 80s, the term crack babies. Remember, babies were being born addicted to crack. This baby had meth in his system because the mother was using during her pregnancy. And the hospital, whose job it is to care for the well-being of people, did not report that to the Department of Children's Services. I'm baffled.
How does that slip through the cracks? How does that not? First of all, the idea of meth in an umbilical cord, I'm pretty sure that it strikes a tone there. I mean, I've never heard of that before. So I'm not sure how this happened, because so many times in these infant deaths, we always try to see, were there warning signs? Was there a way to prevent this? And maybe there was here.
Yeah, that was the warning sign. The day that he was born, that was the warning sign that he had meth in his system. It tells you the mother, she didn't use right before she went to the hospital to deliver that baby. She was using on a regular basis. That's why it was in his system attached to the umbilical cord, but the hospital didn't report it. I can't believe it, Jesse.
And Sterling's life was just difficult, I imagine, from the beginning. I mean, he was born in a bathtub and he died in a swing. Just the idea of this is so disturbing, and you can't help but think how defenseless and vulnerable he is. And it's different than any victim we see here on Law and Crime.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jesse, keep in mind, he was actually born likely addicted to methamphetamine as well.
I think all of our viewers just need to process that statement, what you just said. And we know what? We're going to take a minute to process that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, a lot more to talk about. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about what's happening in this case. And I'm back here with Vincent Hill. Vincent, from a personal perspective, this must be really tough for you to hear about a case about a fallen officer.
Absolutely, Jesse. And when I heard that radio transmission of Officer Bolton trying to key up on that radio, I knew as an experienced police officer something was wrong, as well as the other officers there in Memphis. They knew, based on that tone of voice, something was wrong. And this is why I always say, Jesse, in policing, nothing is routine, especially when you're talking about a traffic stop or a suspicious vehicle, not only because you don't know who's in the vehicle, but you don't know what's in the vehicle. And we later found out, of course, that there was a gun in the vehicle used to kill this officer.
Yeah, and the fact that his service pistol was still holstered, what does that tell you?
Means he didn't have a chance. He really didn't even see it coming. Usually the bad guy, Jesse, here's what a lot of people don't understand. The bad guy typically has to jump on the police officer because the bad guy is already contemplating doing something that the police officer is not aware of. So when he was taken out of, when Tremaine was taken out of that car, he already knew what his intent was, and the officer never saw it coming.
And what we see, is there a way that the defense is going to say, well, he feared for his life? I think Wilborn will testify in this case, but he was saying at one point there was a conversation where he was like, someone videotape what's happening. So well, videotape what's happening. And I know that there was a report earlier on in the in this case that someone, you know, there was someone else had been gunned down by police in that area. And I want to talk about that on the upside of our break, about the idea of what was going on in the defendant's mind and will that work? And that's what we're going to talk about, because trying to understand the defense's role in this case is really interesting. But we will take a quick break. When we come back, we will be talking a lot more. And remember, we're covering 2 live trials today. Okay, so that was an interesting discussion about the struggle that ensued and the shots that were fired. I want to bring on another guest that we have with us right now, a very special guest. Criminal investigator Charles Middlestat is with us. Charles, great to have you here on Law and Crime.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
So when you're investigating this case, how does it differ from other kinds of crime scenes that you're looking at, where you are talking about a fallen officer, a police shooting? How does it differ?
Well, first, the distinction here in this case, Jesse, is that it's a death penalty case, so that changes everything. You're automatically really preparing for 2 different cases. You're preparing for a guilt-innocence phase case, and then you're also preparing for a mitigation phase. And in this instance, like all death penalty cases, the focus is on trying to spare your client's life and the likelihood that they're going to be convicted during the guilt-innocence phase, and so trying to ferret out some of the mitigation along the way in the guilt-innocence aspect of the case, such as this spontaneous statement that I understand that the defendant made with regard to asking somebody to record it, sort of goes to his state of mind in terms of the fact that he may have felt threatened. Whether that is something that actually is sold to the jury or not is an entirely different matter, but it's certainly something that the defense can use in terms of trying to mitigate his conduct.
So aside from the statement that the defendant allegedly made, that, you know, someone record me, you know, that he felt that his life was in danger, what other evidence from the crime scene would back that up, that he was really in danger from this officer, that he had to take deadly force?
Well, as I understand it, the defense has already tried to parade this another incident that may have occurred a couple of years earlier, and I think that the judge actually asked the jury to ignore that and to disregard that with regard to, I think it was Darius Stewart, another incident.
Yeah, that was less than a month before this. 19-year-old unarmed was killed by a former MPD officer. Yes.
Right. So when you have that sort of backdrop, along with this spontaneous statement that he made, you know, those really sort of form the basis of his state of mind And, listen, it's a very, very difficult case. Obviously, it's tragic. It involves a fallen officer. It's something we have to take very, very seriously. But, you only have what you have to work with from a defense perspective. Some of the other evidence is not favorable in terms of, as I understand it, there was a single shot initially and then a pause and then 10 additional rounds that were fired. That's difficult to mitigate.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that. I want to just play some more testimony in case anybody missed it. This is Lawana Stamps, a police radio dispatcher. We played some of her testimony earlier. Let's play a little bit more because these pieces of evidence about trying to understand what happened at that shooting are critical. Take a look. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more with Vincent Hill, our law enforcement expert and fellow host here on the network. Vincent, I didn't get a chance to ask you the question that I posed before about the defense's strategy saying this was self-defense in light of, as I was talking about with Charles, that shooting that happened less than a month before of Darius Stewart, again, an unarmed 19-year-old who was killed by a now former MPD officer. So what do you think about that self-defense argument?
Well, listen, Jesse, I'm trying to keep my cool here as a former police officer. And I talk
Vincent,
about
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. We are getting an update right now. Zachary Koehn has just taken the stand. We're going live into that Iowa courtroom. Everybody stand by. We're going live. Wow, this testimony is absolutely riveting, but we have to get some perspective right now. Vincent Hill, real quick, want to start with you. Reaction to what you're listening to.
Well, I don't think it's weighing in his favor. I mean, at the end of the day, Jesse, he did say he provided her with methamphetamine. She persuaded him, according to him, but he provided that to her. So that goes to the fact that he wasn't worried about the welfare of that little baby if he's giving the mother of that baby methamphetamine.
You know, and Charles, working long hours, weak stomach, said that Cheyenne took responsibility. He would ask her about questions with the baby, including a loss of weight, and she said she wasn't concerned about it. Is this favoring him, or what do you think? This isn't going to work?
Well, I don't think at the end of the day, Jesse, it's going to work. I mean, they're doing the best they can. He's trying to thread a needle here, and he's acknowledged a drug issue, but then he's essentially mounted this unavailability defense where he's just not around, and therefore he wasn't responsible in some way. But I just don't think, given the horrific nature of this case, the jury's gonna give him a pass. I mean, they're gonna hold both parents equally responsible, and but it's it's the best they can do. He's actually fairly well prepped. Yeah,
and we can't wait to see what happens under cross-examination. Vincent Hill, I know we have to sign you off. Thanks so much for coming on. Charles, stand by. Jesse. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be live back with the Koehn case. Stay tuned.